You're live.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Linda Watanabe McFerrin, founder of Left Coast Writers. We're a salon that's been meeting at Book Passage for almost 2 decades now. And now, today, thanks to Zoom, I'm thrilled to be hosting 4 panelists discussing the concept of sanctuary, safe haven. It seems right and timely at this particular instant to have this panel. And I have Cindy Rasicot, who's with us today, to thank for bringing all of these panelists to my attention. And I will introduce you all to the slate right now. Tonight we have Cindy Rasicot. Wave, Cindy.
Hey.
We have Veena Rao.
Hi.
We have Judith Tieitelman and Anniqua Rana. Each panelist is going to introduce you to her work and the topic of finding sanctuary and how it appears in her work. After that, we're going to open it up to questions. So you have Q&A and chat to get your questions across to all of us. But we'll wait until the panelists have delivered their part of the presentation to you all, and then we'll ask questions. You can address a question to a particular panelist if you like, and we'll make sure that the panelist knows that the question is for them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to the first person in the panel, and that is Veena. Are you starting?
No,
or is
it's Judith.
Oh, it's Judith. I'm sorry. Judith Tieitelman is going to begin the panel. Judith.
Okay, thank you, Linda, and thank you so much for you and Left Coast Writers for inviting us here. We're so pleased to be here.
We're excited.
Thank you. I'm Judith Tieitelman, author of Guest House for Ganesha, a magical realist tale of love, loss, and spirit reclaimed. This is my debut novel. By profession, I've been an arts management consultant, facilitator, and educator for nearly 40 years. Basically most of my life. To introduce our discussion, I want to begin by saying that the search for sanctuary, safe haven, elsewhere is not uncommon throughout time, history, and geography, most especially during uncertain times or when one experiences a dramatic or traumatic event. We 4 authors, all published by She Writes Press, have books that share this theme, and we've come together to discuss the unique paths we chose for our characters to find sanctuary. My novel, although fiction, was inspired by a real-life event that informed my fictional protagonist, Esther's search for elsewhere. My novel's tagline essentially sums it up. Left at the altar spurned, what does that do to a young woman's heart, and why would a Hindu god care? The significant spark that conceived the gist of this story was finding out at my at the family lunch following my maternal grandmother's funeral that she had been abandoned at the altar at 17 years of age. I only knew my grandmother as a mean-spirited, bordering on nasty woman, and it was always difficult and unpleasant to be around her. And trying to be understanding, I attributed that her experiences during World War II, she's from Germany, losing most of her family, having to give up 2 daughters, leave her husband and home, struggle to survive, etc., had hardened her irreparably. But no, it had been love, or more precisely, lost love, devastated love, abandoned love, something most of us experience at one time or another in our lives. And that is what had made her callous, unyielding, relentless, and self-absorbed the rest of her life. This experience informed all of her actions, yes, yet also, and importantly, it made her a survivor. I was inspired to take this kernel and explore the concept in depth, and thus Guest House for Ganesha came into being. I will now share the opening pages of my novel to give you a taste of the story's unfolding. Just a brief opening. Chapter 1. Esther Grunspan arrived in Kuhn with a hardened heart as her sole luggage. An uncommonly sweltering September day was her welcome, as well as a language that sounded like her native Yiddish, yet foreign in structure and comprehension. A formidable determination guided her actions. Stancia, ik darf een stancia. Lodging, I need lodging, Esther demanded of the first person in uniform that crossed her path. Wo ken ik op zo'n stancia? Where can I find lodging? Her articulation was clear and direct, emphatic. Quizzical, the man's eyes skimmed this plain-faced young woman from her faded long-sleeved cotton frock with white rounded collar to her scuffed lace-up shoes. Small in stature, with thick blonde hair pulled away from her face in a tight bun, she was unadorned and clearly out of place. Was ist verstehe Sie nicht? I don't understand you, he said, waving her away and pointing towards the train terminal. Without a note of thanks, Esther headed in the direction he indicated. Once inside the terminal, she strode through the cavernous building to consider every booth, kiosk, and stand until she found a corner counter with a large sign overhead announcing Informationen. This was close enough to the Yiddish Informatia for Esther to push her way to the front of the line, disregarding the glares and loud protests of those in her way. She paid them no heed. Patience was no longer a part of her framework. It had been displaced by entitlement and self-preservation. The recent devastating turn of events, Tadeusz's action, his rejection, and such a public spurn of her, of them, of all their plans, had shaped an impossibly conceived scenario. Esther's one priority now was Esther. She repeated her request to the man behind the counter 3 times. Each time she enunciated every syllable more precisely, then more slowly, but colored by rising frustration. The official, while clearly annoyed, noticed her youth and asked, "Wie alt sind Sie?" Alt, Esther thought quickly, alt, old, just like in my language. Although the other words made no sense, she correctly assumed he was asking her age. 17, she said. The man shrugged his shoulders, rolled his eyes, and turned to help the person next in line. Esther leaned over and grabbed the pen on his desk. In clear, thick lettering, she wrote the numbers 1 and 7 on her palm. Standing on the tips of her shoes, she stretched her left arm high and held it up close to his face. With a snort, he reached into a pile under his desk and thrust a piece of paper in Esther's expectant hands. She looked intently at the page's Gothic script and line drawing of a building. This must be a place for young people to stay, she deduced, for next to a name and address, 16 through 22 was printed. A map of the area with a large X seemed to mark its location. Expressing no appreciation, Esther turned quickly, jostled the 3 people beside her, and ventured out into her first metropolis, a location as far away from all she had ever known as her meager resources enabled, a place with an assurance of anonymity and seclusion. If she could still muster gratitude for anything, it would be for this. Okay, thank you. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Anniqua Rana, author of Wild Boar in the Cane Field.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, if you're in California. Yes, my name is Anniqua Rana, and I'm the author of Wild Boar in the Cane Field, which came out in 2019. And similar to Judith, I also focused on magic realism. And one of the things about magic realism is when so much is going on around you, that's probably the only way you can make meaning out of life. So my own background is I have spent many years teaching in the community college system. And last year I decided I want to take writing on full time. And so I run a blog called thelism.com, which means magic in Urdu and Arabic. So my main character, Tara, was found as a baby covered in flies. So how can someone who is abandoned as a baby, how can someone like that find sanctuary? And like all of us are doing nowadays, we look around us, all of the challenges that we're going through, and we look for those moments of peace. And, whether it's in the places that we go to, whether it's the people that we're in, or whether it's one small moment that will give us peace and sanctuary. So this is exactly what Tara does. when we first see her in the novel, she is in a home in the middle of a farm in a village in rural South Asia. It could be anywhere, but in particular, it is in the region of the Punjab, which is a region which is shared between Pakistan and India. And she's surrounded by fields. And these fields are fields of alfalfa and cotton, but there's also the ominous cane fields that can harbor wild boar that scare the village folk around them. But central to the villagers is also a shrine for the keeper of the flies, the shrine of Saint Makiawala. And these are the flies that will also tell Tara's story when it becomes too difficult for her to tell the story herself. The people that she looks for, peace or sanctuary, are the two women who take her in. Safia, the woman who owns the farm, who is a widow and takes care of the village folk around her, and Bhaga, who is a servant to Safia and has three sons of her own. And also Tara's playmate, Maria, who is also a person that gives her peace. And lastly, she looks for peace in moments of her life. And one of those moments is when we see her nearer the opening, where she is creating a jasmine braid to be able to flirt with the young boys that she is enamored by. But what I'd like to share with you here is somewhere nearer the end of the book, Tara is now a young adult. She's married, she's expecting her first child, and she is in her third trimester, and Bhaga has taken her to a midwife to show her the flower of Maryam. The flower of Maryam is also known as the Rose of Mary or the Rose of Jericho. And it is a mythical flower that is used during childbirth it's a dried flower that's placed in water, and as it blooms, it is supposed to calm the woman who is bearing the child. So we're in the midwife's house, and Bhaga and Tara are both waiting for the midwife to show her this flower. And the midwife's two children around, they're about 3 and 5, and they're hovering around excited about this magical flower. So we first hear the midwife's daughter. Is her baby coming out? The girl's voice reminded me of Maria's when I had cared for her at that age, but she was not as innocent. She was trying to charm her mother before she left the room to be with her brother again. Not yet, her mother responded. She has time. Are you going to show her the flower magic? Her daughter smiled. This little girl knew how to win her mother back. The midwife stroked her daughter's hair and smiled at her. Go get me the earthen bowl and fill it with water at the pump. The little girl rushed out and her brother followed her. He seemed to have forgotten his original anger and wanted to join in on the fun of the magical flower. This interaction between a mother and her children was entirely different from what I had experienced or seen with Bhaga or Jannat, but it pleased me. I would do the same. I would admonish my children like this, and then I would hug them and make them laugh, like the two laughing at the hand pump outside. I could see the children at play from where I lay. The little boy pumped energetically, and his sister stood close to the stream, barely able to hold the bowl as water splashed everywhere. Her brother, noticing it was too heavy for his sister to carry, took the bowl from her hands and brought it to the doorstep. He stood there, knowing not to cross over it into the room where I lay on the charpai, and his mother took the bowl from him. She placed the shriveled plant into the bowl. Nothing happened. The midwife sensed my impatience. It takes time, she said. Keep looking at the plant. I'm not sure how long it took, but I could hear Bhaga's heavy breathing in the background as each bud of the flower unfurled, spread the twig into a fully blossomed plant. I might have even dozed off for a while, but I was awoken by the midwife explaining what had happened. You see, the flower will call to your body to open up, to release the new life. The pain will reduce and become a sweet pleasure when you see your baby for the first time. She touched my stomach again and announced, "You see, even your baby has relaxed as you watch the flower bloom." Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce now Veena Rao, and she's the author of Purple Lotus.
Thank you, Anniqua. I just love that both our protagonists are Tara. Even though our books are diverse, I think, they have something in common, right? Hello, friends, and good evening or good afternoon if you're in California. I'm Veena Rao, author of Purple Lotus, winner of the She Writes Press STEP Manuscript Contest, which is open annually to women of color. And like my protagonist, Tara, I'm also an immigrant from India and now call Atlanta home. I come from a patriarchal culture and I have firsthand experience of what patriarchy can do and how it can influence the way you view yourself. And so it was very important for me to write about a woman who is conditioned to believe she is weak, who feels vulnerable and fearful, and like she has no control over her life. Because I was this woman at one point. So it was my own life's journey has been all about confronting my own fears and insecurities and learning to honor my own worth. And this is something I wanted to explore in my debut novel. So Purple Lotus is the story of Tara, an immigrant woman in the American South who is trapped in a loveless and physically and emotionally abusive marriage. And she's also, she feels powerless in the face of pressure from her patriarchal family to make peace with her destiny. And she also struggles with a deep-rooted sense of shame that is instilled deep in her. I'm sorry. The story gradually follows Tara as she builds the courage to break free, to gently rebuild her life, and to learn to honor her own worth. And she eventually discovers that her sanctuary is her inner home, where she feels safe and secure and like she has control over her life. So I'll be reading an essay that Tara writes for her hometown newspaper, where she's essentially confronting her patriarchal community. And it pretty much summarizes her journey from victim to survivor to change maker. My first act of self-determination at the age of 36 made me a pariah. My crime? I walked out of an abusive, loveless marriage. Up until that point, I was only fodder for gossip. First, because I was not good enough, pretty enough, smart enough, outgoing enough to win a husband in an arranged marriage. And next, because the man who married me abandoned me for 3 years. No reasons were asked of him. It was my fault. I hadn't tried hard enough to be worthy of him. Ours is a culture where a man's word is the word. So when my ex had a change of heart and sent for me, my family only felt relief. I was packed off to the US, no questions asked. I felt relief too, to escape the torment that our society reserves for an abandoned wife. When I landed in America, the land of dreams, I already felt like a zero. My sense of self-worth crushed by my own people. It got worse. I was ignored, neglected, denied a wife's place. And yet, the onus was on me to try harder to make the marriage work. My ex told me the marriage was a mistake. I begged him not to send me back. If I had returned, they would have branded me an even bigger failure. It escalated to emotional and physical violence. He was still not answerable to anyone. When he threw me out, I summoned the courage to move on. But my ex had a change of heart and was ready to accept me back. I was told I had no choice but to go back. Good wives make peace with your circumstances. They don't fight their destiny. They don't put their own happiness before their family's reputation, I was told. Forcing people to get back together does not magically breed love. My ex and I both knew that. There was nothing to bind us together. Not love, not affection, not shared interests, not shared dreams. Then something magical happened to me. One day, 5 years into a meaningless, miserable marriage, I realized that I deserve better. When I walked out into the unknown, strangely, I wasn't dying. My spirit was only then finding rebirth. My life in the months that followed was filled with the love and kindness of friends, which was driven by my own courage. I was finally a person with dreams, desires, and many reasons to live. I finally had taken control of my life. Sadly, this basic right is denied to many of us. To the modern day keepers of our traditions, I ask, why is it always the woman who is instructed to try harder to win over her husband, to adjust, to stay silent, to make peace with the injustices she faces? When things go wrong, why can't she turn to her family? If she finally decides to stand up for herself, why does her family not stand with her? Why is the victim victimized even further? Why are no questions asked of the perpetrator? A feature I did for the Morning Herald with a senior colleague in the late 90s comes to my mind. It was a heartbreaking interview with Kamala, whose alcoholic husband had set her on fire in a drunken rage. Kamala had refused to implicate her husband up until her death a week later. Afraid of retribution from her husband and his family in case she survived the burns, Kamala claimed the fire was an accident. The story quickly made national headlines. Public sympathy for Kamala grew into a massive wave, pushing the police into action. The husband was labeled a monster, and the law quickly caught up with him. And as far as I know, he's still serving out his life sentence. But not all monsters are egregious. Some stay hidden in plain sight. They wear a normal mask. They don't set you on fire. They crush your spirit slowly until you die every day. The monster is not the perpetrator alone. The ones who breed him, the ones who victimize the victim, the relatives and neighbors and town people who judge unfairly, they are monsters too. The monster is the anachronistic mindset that needs to change. I was expected to exist for society. I chose to live, to love. I take heart in the knowledge that the monsters around me do not sully me because the names they have for me are not the names I give myself. So thank you once again for this opportunity, Linda, Left Coast Writers. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Cindy Rasicot, author of the wonderful memoir, Finding Venerable Mother, A Daughter's Spiritual Quest to Thailand.
Thank you, Veena, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to give a special thank you to Linda because Linda was my first writing teacher. And so she really helped me through many of the first drafts. And if any of you have studied with her, you know she's a fabulous teacher. So it's a special honor for me to be here today and presenting with her and with all the other authors. So my book, Finding Venerable Mother, A Daughter's Spiritual Quest to Thailand, details my search for sanctuary. I define sanctuary as that sacred place of belonging that I call home. I had no idea when I moved to Thailand in 2005 with my former husband and 13-year-old son that I would find sanctuary with the Thai Buddhist nun Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni. Now, for those of you who don't know about expat life, it's a very privileged lifestyle. So I had a housekeeper and a cook, better known as a maid, and I had left my part-time job. We've, of course, left our family and friends. So I felt very adrift and kind of isolated and unsure of who I was, what I was doing. and what I wanted to do while I spent my time there. So I signed up for a conference put on by Aid to Women in Development. And at that conference, there was an afternoon session called Faith, Feminism, and the Power of Love. So there were 9 panelists, women from all around the world, gathered to talk about the sort of the connection between religion, faith, and feminism. Somewhere along the line, about 3/4 of the way through the dialogue, there was a contentious debate between 2 Muslim panelists. And we watched it was kind of like a tennis game, watching the ball being lopped back and forth. And at the end, there was silence. Well, into that silence stepped a tall Thai woman dressed in saffron robes with a shaved head, wire-rimmed glasses, and flip-flops. She spoke in a quiet, calm voice and said, "We cannot solve anything with anger. Anger doesn't lead us anywhere. It is much harder to practice loving kindness and compassion. That is the goal of Buddhism." Well, I was kind of floored. I was immediately drawn to this woman, so much so that I went and spent my first weekend with her right after that workshop, and actually did my first alms round, which I'll read a passage from today. I wanted to say just a little bit about Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni. She is the first fully ordained Thai Theravada Buddhist nun in Thailand. And to put that in context, there were approximately 300,000 male monks at the time she was ordained, and 1 ordained female, and that was Dhammananda. They call her the feminist monk, so she's quite a credible role model for me. She was both a revered kind of venerable mother figure, compassionate and caring, and strong and determined. So she combined a sort of a combination of vulnerability and strength. My search for sanctuary culminated with my ordination in 2014, which I write about in the book. And my memoir is a fascinating look at how a Northern California Thai woman comes to be ordained in the Thai Buddhist tradition. So for my excerpt, I'm going to read about Alms Round. I'll say a little bit about it before I start. Every Sunday morning, people stand outside their houses from 6 to 7 a.m. offering food, water, and flowers to the nuns. It's a very revered tradition in Thailand. After the food is given, the nuns say a blessing. I'm just going to take a little bit of water before I start. What an odd sight we make, I thought. 3 nuns, 3 Thai women, and 2 Farang, foreigners, coiling like a long snake down a side street. I felt vulnerable, as if I were missing an essential part of my clothing, a skirt you can see through without a slip. The houses beside the road were wooden shacks, stacked one against the other and open to the street with a sunshade overhead. Garbage was strewed alongside the road. There was a sour smell of decay in the air. Clearly, these people were poor. How could they afford to donate food, I wondered. The procession slowed before a family waiting in front of the house. A mother held a squirming young daughter in her arms. An older woman, possibly the child's grandmother, was there too. They looked calmly into Dhammananda's eyes as if greeting a trusted friend. No words were spoken. The mother placed her daughter at Dhammananda's feet. She picked up a pot, carefully doled out 2 scoops of warm rice into each of the monks' bowls. The older woman collected small plastic bags filled with vegetables and clear broth sitting on a nearby table. She placed 1 bag on the lid of each alms bowl. The monks turned around and passed the bag to us. We were like a human receiving line, scooping up the bags of food and handing them to the 2 Thai women who walked alongside us, pushing a wooden handcart to transport the food back to the monastery. Well, the cart began to fill up with water bottles, food, flowers, fruit, and sweet orange and pink Thai desserts. At the next house, an old woman stood out front holding a tin rice pot. Her face was brown and lined with wrinkles. Eyes closed, she raised the pot to her forehead. Her lips moved silently in prayer. She picked up a cone of white lotus blossoms, carefully wrapped in broad green banana leaves, and placed them on the lid of Dhammananda's alms bowl. I remained behind Dhammananda while the monks delivered their blessing. Afterwards, Dhammananda leaned in close to me and whispered, "This woman has cancer." I appreciated knowing something about people's personal stories. Living in a gated community with other expats, I hadn't yet experienced any connection with the Thai people other than my housekeeper. Walking with Dhammananda was like entering a private world, discovering the Thailand that existed beyond the locked gates of a protected compound. Dhammananda turned down a side road onto a dirt path. Through the trees and brush, I could see a small white house with a family seated on the porch. A young man who Dhammananda told us was small for his age sat between his mother and father. He looked like a boy, but as I got closer, his face appeared older. His large head dwarfed his small body. I later learned that he was 35 years old. Dhammananda called everyone in close. I wondered if our group might be intimidating to the man, but our presence didn't seem to bother him. Perhaps he'd seen foreigners walking in alms rounds before. He glanced up at Dhammananda with a look of wonder on his face. All eyes focused on this Thai man as we circled around him. Laboring for breath, his chest lifted and fell as he wheezed in and out. He pressed his palms together as his mother lifted a precious spoonful of rice into Dhammananda's alms bowl. Filled with tenderness, Dhammananda bent over to receive the offering. We paused, watching spellbound. A wave of compassion rose in my chest. My vision blurred as warm tears slid down my cheeks. It was just a momentary flash. Buddhists, Christians, Jews, Thais, Americans, all standing together, connected by an invisible thread of caring. When my vision cleared, faces and colors came into focus. Red flowers appeared richer, pink petals more vibrant. For the first time in Thailand, I didn't feel like a foreigner. Standing in the outdoor sanctuary, I was profoundly grateful to have found Dhammananda, a gifted Buddhist teacher who willingly accepted me, a stranger, into her community. A sense of calm flooded through me as I fell back into the silent procession, and we headed back to the temple for breakfast. So thank you, and I want to thank everyone again who's here today, and I'm going to be passing this back to Linda.
Okay, thank you all. What wonderful readings. It's great to hear a little bit of each of your books. I don't see any questions, but I have some questions. So if it's all right with you all, I'll open with those. One of my questions is, often we view sanctuary as a space, an area, a place that we go to. And what I thought was really wonderful about your readings is that in each of those readings, sanctuary isn't really so much a place that you go to as a space that you find. For example, in one of the readings, I think it was Veena's reading, you talked about the sanctuary of just finding a place for yourself, for the woman finds a place for herself. And I think you mentioned in your writing the sanctuary of the page, which I thought was very interesting, that writing itself is a kind of a sanctuary. You mentioned something that led me to think about that and how for writers sanctuary can be the page. In Cindy's, it was kindness and the generosity of spirit towards others and caring about somebody else more than yourself. I think right now we're all looking for places of sanctuary. So I was wondering if each of you would talk a little bit about that sanctuary and what I think that Anniqua, you said something about peace being a sanctuary. I never thought about that, is that you can find peace. About where we can find sanctuary and what your books are pointing us toward. So maybe we start with Veena.
Okay. Well, I think the sanctuary for Tara, my protagonist,
Yes.
is essentially a place inside her where she feels um, secure and like she has some control over her life, because that was what was missing. I come from a patriarchal family myself, you know, a very patriarchal culture. And one of the things that we grow up with is this feeling of not having any control over what happens to us, right? And we grow up feeling with this feeling of, you know, like you're weak in some way, like you're, if for instance, Tara is in an abusive marriage. Um, it's both physically and mentally abusive, and it escalates to a point where her husband throws her out of the house, and yet there's so much pressure on her to, you know, come back. Something must be wrong with her. She's not dealing with him properly, you know. Something is triggering him. It's all her fault. So to me, sanctuary is a place where um, Tara finds control over her life. She's able to control her destiny. She's able to walk out and gently rebuild her life and learn to find lasting happiness. And I think sanctuary is a place where, you know, ultimately it's about feeling joyful and secure in who you are, in your skin. And to me, that's a very personal story as well, because finding my own sanctuary has been a long journey where I had to confront my own fears and insecurities and learn to honor my own worth and learn to not just exist, like Tara says in her essay, but to live, you know,
Right.
to live a full life. So that's sanctuary to me.
Wonderful. Anybody? Yes, Judith.
I just want to piggyback on that because very much so, Esther Grunspan, my character, lost all control when she was left at the altar, and it hardened her. And she too needed control and needed to find, needed to be in control and needed to find how she could both be fully in control and find peace. Ultimately, the sanctuary she finds is elsewhere. So she does go on a search. But first and foremost, it had to be within herself. So it's not dissimilar at all to Venus Terra.
Exactly. Yeah. Cindy, you have something to say.
I have a couple of thoughts on sanctuary. One is one of place, because to this day, when I go visit Dhammananda at her monastery, Sangdhamma Kalyani temple, I feel like I've come home. So that's the first element of coming home. But the second one is, I think when I was ordained, because I went through, it's a passage in the book where I'm down on my knees and sobbing in gratitude, giving thanks to Dhammananda. And there's some kind of healing. It's a sub story in my book too, of healing my own relationship to my mother. And I think as women, we come into our birthright as women when we heal and recover from, in my case, a rather difficult relationship with my mother. I came into myself as a person. And I was also very nervous before they shaved my head. I was really wondering how that would feel. And it really felt like kind of joyous. It felt like I let go of all roles and expectations. So in line with what Veena and Judith are saying, it's this sense of coming home to self, coming home to who I am, that deeper sense of authenticity, of who we all are as people. And I think we experience that as artists as well. When we, maybe when we're writing and we find that deeper connection, and it comes, for me, it comes from a deeper source inside me. It doesn't come from my head, it comes from my heart or somewhere in there. But it's all about sanctuary and wholeness and belonging and self. and can be place or self or all of the above, I think.
Yes, true, true. Did you want to add anything,
Yes.
Anniqua?
Yes, I actually really appreciated the point you made earlier about finding sanctuary on the page. And of course, nowadays, one way that I have connected with other writers is by finding quiet times to write together. Um, and it's kind of similar to what Veena and the others have been saying, is being able to control what you want to do. Now, granted, sometimes when you're writing, it seems as if it's not under your control. I mean, we all go through different iterations of writing. Um, but also to be able to visualize where you want life to be and then taking control of it and taking your life there. So basically writing your own story, envisioning your own story and then writing it and then sharing it. All of these things can create peace for you, because that is what, I mean, the storytelling is what creates a permanence to our lives, which we know physically cannot happen, but at least being able to document, share, and talk about it, we know historically and otherwise that is how we find a feeling of permanence in our lives. So.
Those are wonderful responses. While I was listening, I was thinking about sanctuary, and I think it's such an important topic these days. I was thinking about myself and how I find sanctuary. And this sort of takes me back to your book, Cindy, which I love, by the way. I just think it's such a wonderful book, Finding Venerable Mother, because one of the ways that I think you find sanctuary is through a community. And for lately these days, I lost my brother not too long ago. And I am so surprised at how important community is and how that is kind of a sanctuary. I've gotten so much, the kindness of your friends and the way they come to your assistance. They create kind of a safe place for us in times of need, which I think is really incredible. And I think that they sort of have buoyed me up and kind of created a sanctuary from this whole COVID environment, which played a factor in the loss. I think that in writing your books, you've all created these little, because books become part of the community, you've all created little sanctuaries for people where they can go and be in this safer place, or a place where things work out well, or where you can find sanctuary. So I want to say that I really, really appreciate the work that you all are doing along those lines with your books. I want to add, so thank you all. And I just want to add that Marlena Maduro Baraf says to all of you that it's all very profound to be able to create your stories. And she wanted to tell Cindy that was a very inspiring reading. But I think you all have done really inspiring readings. I have another question for you, and it's because you're all writers with She Writes Press, a press that I deeply admire. And I know some of the people that are watching the webinar have registered for the webinar are writers. Many of them are writers. Can you talk a little bit about the She Writes Press experience? Because I'm just amazed that Brooke and her team have brought out all these wonderful books together. So this is a question for all of you, if you want to add anything about the experience and the fact that you're working as a group together, which I think is very communal and kind of cool. Anybody want to comment on that? Yes.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, so, my manuscript, it took me 10 years to find a publisher, to write the story and find a publisher. I've been through bucket loads of rejections, which I'm sure most authors go through. But then, last year, it was in 2019, the summer of 2019, I just happened to visit the Twitter page of She Writes Press. And I came across this manuscript contest, the STEP manuscript contest, which is open annually to women of color. And I just, I just happened to submit my manuscript, and then I forgot all about it. So imagine my joy when I was informed by Brooke and my the associate publisher Lauren Weiss that I had won the contest, and a book
very exciting.
it included a book deal and a deal with Booksparks. So that was one of the most joyful moments of my life. And also, I wanted to add that, I wrote in a very isolated space. I did not know any authors until I became a published author myself. I've never been to a writing workshop or not even a writers group. And so, the sisterhood that I find here, this amongst the She Writes Press authors, it's incredible. I've learned so much about the writing process in the past 1 year. And I'm incredibly, very, very, very grateful to She Writes Press for this wonderful opportunity. It's a long-term dream that has come true. It's a lifelong dream.
It's very, very exciting. And I think we're all glad that She Writes Press is on scene now, because there was a long time when you couldn't find that kind of community, especially for women. Cindy, yeah, you wanted to say something.
I just want to say what She Writes Press is. It's a hybrid press. So it's kind of in between people who self-publish and people who have agents and publish through maybe a publisher, a different kind of publisher, I should say. And so it is, you do contribute some of your own money towards it. And in terms of paying for the She Writes contract and your publicity. But the thing is, you get a lot more control in terms of what your path is as an artist. And also, they now have a distributor, Ingram Press, so it's widely distributed on your behalf to many bookstores and different locales. So I just wanted to say a little bit about what a hybrid press is.
And actually, that's a sort of a newer feature, because the Ingram Spark program is relatively new in the context of publishing. And because so many people were self-publishing, and because there was that capability, they sort of developed out of that, so that there was a distribution process for those books, which there never was before. So I think that both She Writes Press and the Ingram Spark program and the new methods of distribution are all part of the trend of people publishing their own work and getting the word out about their own work. And as somebody who's published in many, many ways, we published the Wonderland series, which is a series book, but I've also been published by traditional publishers from my very first novel on. And I will just say that you end up doing a lot no matter who you are published by. You can be published by a traditional publisher, but it does rest upon the writer to get the word out there. What I think is really, and often they're a stable of writers, but they're kind of all writing their own sorts of things. And I love the community that's created in She Writes Press. The associate, everybody knows that they're in it together. It's kind of like, okay, we're a group, we're going to get things going together, just as this happened all together. So that's very, very exciting part of it. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Judith.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. To a great extent, She Writes Press is really the same as a traditional publisher, but it's a partnership. I mean, you go through the same vetting process for your work. Ingram Publishing Services is the exact same company that all the top 5 publishers use. But the gift of She Writes is that it really is a real community. And I don't know of, COVID aside, I don't know of any other publishing house that brings their authors together for their biannual authors retreat, which couldn't happen last year because of the pandemic. But there is such encouragement from Brooke that everyone speak to each other. And if you have any questions, we've got a Facebook page. They've got a detailed handbook. There is such transparency that I know fellow authors who have been published by the top publishing houses who are not allowed to speak to other authors. And it's this wonderful community, which is a sanctuary unto itself, I would say.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
I was going to kind of, yes, of course, ditto to all that everyone is saying, but I also would like to add that it gives an empowerment. My book now has been published in Pakistan as well from a different publisher. So it's opened a door for me, and it has empowered me to understand the world of publishing, which if, I could have waited and kind of tried and tried from the other perspectives, the other ways, but I found this was a very empowering process to go through. And when people talk about writing being isolating, I have lucked out, I think, in I don't have to be isolated. And I, having taught most of my life and being used to being in a community in a variety of different spaces, I don't know if I would have been able to survive in the writing community if I was isolated. So having this community of writers is brilliant.
I think that's it's changed a lot, the whole publishing industry, and I think in that case change is good. Speaking of change, last year was a really intense year, or because of COVID. And did your books all come out last year?
No. Mine came out in May 2019. And
okay.
I was very fortunate that I did do a national book tour. I had lots of events planned for last year that couldn't happen. Hopefully, eventually they will, but then new opportunities came up, like us four authors getting together and brainstorming and seeing how we could work together. And Zoom has become such a critical platform.
Oddly, it's wonderful because you can be on the East Coast and still talk to everybody on the West Coast, and you don't have to get in your car and drive anywhere, which is really, really terrific. So I'm kind of surprised. I have come to it very, very slowly. We at Left Coast Writers came to it really, really slowly because, we love getting together and doing things, but we're finding that this is a way to get together and do things as well.
Correct.
So my question, the reason I brought that up is my questions are, what do you all have planned? Where can we expect to see your work coming up here? Do you have any events planned? Do you have other Zoom things planned? Would you talk a little bit, maybe each of you, about where we can find you? Let's start with Cindy.
Okay, you can find me on cindyrasicot.com. And it's my website, and there's actually a live interview with Damananda there if you're interested in seeing her. We have several events proposals out to do other presentations. We haven't heard back from them yet. I actually heard from some people in Thailand that they have read my book and want to do a book discussion. So that's definitely not doable for anyone here. But at some point I will probably do another interview at Inside LA. I did interview Damananda earlier this year, and I'll probably have her come again to Inside LA, which is similar to Spirit Rock, the meditation center in Northern California, but it's in Southern California. And Damananda will talk about emotional Buddhism in times of emotional stress, how it can help. So that's
great.
Mm-hmm.
And Cindy, would you give us your website is cindyrasicot.com, right?
Yes.
They can find you at cindyrasicot.com.
Yes.
I also want to, let me just share a note before we go on that Rita Gardner has sent to all of you a comment that these were deep and riveting stories. So there's a thank you from Rita as well. Others, where can we find? Are you going to be reading? Are you going to be out and about?
So yes, I am utilizing whatever opportunity I can get to talk about my book. But my current project, which is a blog about memories and literature, which my sister and I have put together, and I just posted it. It's thelism.com. Thelism means magic, and we're requesting people to submit and we've had quite a few poets and writers who have been interested in submitting, sharing your stories. And so taking the novel itself that I've written and I've already decided to write more, but I'm focusing primarily on the blog for now. So I can be found there.
Wonderful. I also want to mention that we, through the powers of aide de camp Michael, we are going to have this entire panel on video, so we'll be able to send that to you all to share, and then we'll put it up as well, so that people will be able, even if they miss this particular event, will still be able to hear you speak about your books and learn a little bit more about what you are writing, a little bit more about your point of view on sanctuary. Also, that your books are all available at Book Passage. And there's a link up at Book Passage for each of your books, and we really thank them for doing that. Anniqua, I have a, Marlene Maduro Baraf is asking you to spell out the name of your blog.
It's TILLISM. And I posted the link there. And
okay, great. Thank you. And
I put my website, Guest House for Ganesha,
Tieitelman.
in the chat.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Correct.
Tieitelman.
Right, guesthouseforganesha.com.
Right.
Yes, I see it there. Okay, guesthouseforganesha.com.
I hope to do many more events with these three lovely women. We've got lots of things gelling, but I also have a handful of different presentations planned over the next 6 months, and they'll all be listed on my website.
Okay, great.
Can I go next?
Well, I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm very active on social media. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram as Veena Rao. And you can also visit my website, veenaspulse.com, VEENASPULSE.com. And I also have an event coming up with Caris. It's an independent bookstore in Atlanta, Caris Bookstore. I'm doing a panel with a couple of other local authors, and the topic is confronting tradition and patriarchy once again. And I look forward to seeing some of y'all there.
Yes, I hope we all do get a chance to hear more from all of you. It's been really, really wonderful. Thanks for sharing all of the information with us. Right now I'm seeing all of these notes. I'm sure you're seeing them too, about how wonderful, how great the conversation has been, and how enlightening it is. Here's a question from John Sulak to all panelists. During this webinar, I looked up all of your ebooks on hoopladigital.com, a library online service. What do you think of that? Does it make a difference if I would borrow and read the book there, or if I bought it elsewhere? Buy it.
Or read it.
Wrong question.
Read it, buy it, but if you buy it from an independent bookseller. They need all the help that they can get. We're strong supporters at Left Coast Writers of the indie booksellers who are trying to stay in business. So buy it from Book Passage, buy it from Mrs. Dalloway's, buy it from A Great Good Place for Books, buy it from an indie bookstore if you can. There's so many of them that are so wonderful, and they're just hanging on these days. So, and we love going there. So let me see if there's, and folks, if you're listening to this and you want to contact these writers, please do. If you feel like you want to read or review their books, that would be a wonderful thing to do. I think we're running out of time here. Any last comments from any of the panelists? Well, I just want to thank you all so much. And again, Cindy, thank you for bringing this marvelous group to my attention. It's been really great, and just really uplifting at this otherwise difficult time. Thanks, ladies. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Okay, and we'll be sharing the information on the, just like we'll be sharing the information on this panel and the Zoom meeting, the Zoom webinar on social media so people can go to it. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.